Well, good day, everyone. Welcome to this CoachNet GPS webinar on First Steps for Planting a Missional Church. And we appreciate you taking an hour of your time today to join us for this webinar. My name is John Van Bruggen, and I am your host for today's event. Today's webinar will focus on the third step of planting a missional church, and that is building a launch team. Our presenter today is Gary Rohrmeyer, as he has been for our previous webinars on First Steps. And Gary is the National Director of Converge USA. Before we get started, I'd like to do two things. One, I'd like you to tell us a little bit about yourselves. And so I'm going to start a poll here. And if you can take a minute just to answer your connection to church planting, we'd appreciate knowing that information about you. Also, while you're doing that, those of you who have been with us before know that there are some features on your screen that you can use to communicate with me as your host. And so if you have a question at any time for Gary throughout the webinar, or if you're experiencing technical difficulties or have a question for me as your host, please feel free to use the chat or the Q&A feature on the right side of your screen, and I'll be glad to communicate with you that way. The second thing I would like to do is for us just take a moment to spend in silence to center ourselves and to acknowledge that God is here, He's with us in this moment. And so let's take a few moments of silence to center ourselves. Come, Lord Jesus. Amen. And now here is our presenter, Gary Rohrmeyer.
Hey, well, good afternoon, everybody. Glad you're joining us for this, I think, third edition or fourth edition of our webinars, free webinars for planting a missional church. I just wanted to kind of go over the goal of First Steps, which I do every time. And our goal is very simple. It's our desire to help you discover the church that God has planted in your heart and to help that become a reality. I'm not here to promote a certain style or model, because I believe that it's going to take a multitude of churches to reach the multitudes in our cities, countries, and world. And so you'll hear me talk about different models. But really, when we talk about those models, we want to look at the missional principles that drive those models. Here's the kind of the overview of the First Steps process. The three biblical concepts that really provide the foundation for church planting are the glory of God, the mission of God, and the kingdom of God. And then we've developed these stages or steps, as you want to call them. But the first step is basically relating with God and others, and God is the one who's building the church, and we need to have a good spiritual foundation in our lives. And in that first section, which you can go back and look at, we talk about the spiritual formation of the planter. We talk about the spiritual leadership, and then we talk about how to develop an intercessory team and also how to develop a financial team. Then our last session that we went through, we talked about networking and gathering. How do you enter a community missionally? And we gave some great practical insights there. Today's session is on building a launch team. And so as you gather people, as you reach people, you pull them in together to develop this launch team that will eventually launch the church. Building a team is one of the most rewarding and yet challenging activities a leader can find themselves in. And church planting is a team sport. And throughout the New Testament, we see people working in community, laboring side by side, and making every sacrifice to achieve the goal of being actively engaged in God's mission. In Acts chapter 1, verses 12 to 14, we see the fruit of Jesus' effort in building a team that was used to launch the church in a very spectacular way in Acts 2. you know, as I read that passage this morning in preparation for this, I just kind of read it slowly and read the names and was reminded of the people who were a part of the different launch teams that I had the privilege of, one, being a part of. Our family's been a part of 4 church plants, 2 as interns, and 1 as a pioneer planter, and then now 1, the current church we're a part of. We're really actually more lay people in that church that we're a part of right now. But I just think of the names, you know, of the people who were courageous enough to join the team to say, you know what, we want to be a part of starting a new church. And so that's one of the things that I want you to think about. I want you to think about what will your team look like? Who are the names that will be on your list? You know, and you know, I could still remember the names. You know, the first people we reached. You know, Paul and Patty and Julie and Jim and Debbie and Misty and Dwayne and all these people that you know, some of them came to Christ, some of them came back to Christ, and helped form our little launch team to launch our church, which is, you know, 20 years later, still going strong, and what an honor and privilege to be a part of that. Well, as a church planter, you have a great opportunity to build a team, and we want to encourage you to do it prayerfully. We want to encourage you to do it with skill, and we want to encourage you to do it with wise counsel. And today we're going to provide just a few things in this session about how to build a launch team. First thing we need to look at, here's actually the questions we're going to answer today. What is a launch team? How do you build agenda harmony? What is an advisory team? That is kind of an initial leadership structure within the new church. And then how do you keep the evangelistic fervor high in the new church? Here's a graph I like to use to set the example of the early stages of a church plant. First, you have the planter. The planter gets out there and networks like crazy. One of the things I tell our church planters to do is that they need to just continually meet people. We avidly practice what I call the 3x5 rule, is that you need to get 5 contacts a day. That's about 35 a week. And you need to at least generate 3 sit-downs with people, either to share the vision, to recruit them to your team, or to share the gospel with them. And so if you go to my blog, GaryRohrmeyer.com, and just even Google the 3x5 rule, I've got a good post on that for that. But the planter needs to get out there and get his name out there. He needs to get as many people out there who are going to know who he is and why he's in that city. And then there's the gathering stage, when you start gathering groups of people together. And we went into that in depth last time. And there's many vehicles of gathering people in prayer groups, gathering people in seeker studies, gathering people in discipleship studies, but just gathering, kind of what I say, strike when the iron's hot. Get people together as soon as you can. And then out of that, you want to build what we call a launch team. When you begin gathering these people together for the purpose of starting a new church. Well, what is a launch team? Well, there's a big discrepancy between what we call a core group and a launch team. Now, back in my day, when I first was a part of starting churches, we always called them core groups. Well, let me show you the difference between a core group and a launch team. A core group is a number of people, as a number of Christians who have been gathered as a Bible study with the goal of starting a new church. Here is some of the things involved in that. They may or may not view the church planter as a leader. They may or may not see themselves as followers. Usually does not have a stated purpose or definable end. Often fosters an us-centeredness. And often it's difficult for new people to break in when you have this, what we call a core group kind of mentality. over the years, we've learned a lesson to move away from core groups to more of a launch team posture. Here's what a launch team is. A launch team is a group of evangelistic bringers who have been selected and trained by the church planter. Here's a couple things. The launch team establishes the church planter as their servant leader. It establishes the participants as servant followers, has a clearly stated purpose and goal with a definable termination point, fosters more of an other-centeredness, and helps avoid the insider-outsider distinction. I love Tim Keller's definition here. He really clearly articulates this very well. You know, here's the thing that happens. Some people think it's just semantics. Well, it is, but it's really important because in my first church plant that I was a part of, we had about 14 adults and 14 kids on our initial launch team. A lot of those people were people that we reached with the gospel. And what happened is that we spent 9 months together, kind of in the womb, building this team. And then when we launched the church, we went from 25 to 110, and it was amazing how this core group had this mentality of, well, I don't care about those people, I only care about the core group. And it was like, what did I spend the last 9 months trying to train these people in reaching out and encouraging others? And eventually what happened is that within the first 6 months, I had to kill the core and just tell them we're going to cease calling ourselves the core group, because the core of the church really begins to be built after the church is launched. And one of the things that you can save yourself a lot of problems is by using this launch team terminology. We've actually found in recent church plants I've been a part of is that when we use the launch term language, the launch team stays longer in the life of the church. Back in my day, 20 years ago, when I first planted, it was it was pretty standard practice that you were not going to see. People would say all the time, "Don't be surprised that if half of your core group is gone after you've launched a church in a year." And actually, we've seen that percentage go up when we use this launch team terminology. So that's what we're calling a launch team. That's the definition of that. Let's go on. Let's talk about how do you build agenda harmony. And building agenda harmony is really critical, and we see the spiritual principle here, Paul talking to the Philippian church and just encouraging them, to conduct themselves in a manner worthy of the gospel. Then whether I come and see you or only hear about you in my absence, I will know that you here stand firm in one spirit, contending as one man for the faith of the gospel. And that whole contending and striving, getting a group of people to lock arms together and say, you know what, we're moving forward, to see the gospel advanced in our community. Now, agenda harmony doesn't happen by accident. It takes work. It takes work on the planter's behalf. Paul says, later on in Philippians, he said, make my joy complete by being what? Like-minded, having the same love, and being one in spirit and purpose. There are a lot of people who are going to want to be a part of your church plant that have different ideas. And as a planter, you need to work hard at developing the agenda harmony in your launch team. We have actually in the FirstSteps network, there are actually tools and surveys that we've developed to really help church planters kind of flesh out what are some of the potential problems that take place in a church over this issue. The key to agenda harmony is to having clearly articulated biblical values that are ranked in order of importance and can be measured over time. Now here's one of my little pet peeves with church planners today is that a lot of times we borrow and steal and use other people's value statements, and I think you need to take time and really work on these, because I really believe that churches don't fight over conflict over vision. Where the real conflict comes is in the outworking of the vision, which is really articulated in your values. And I love, I heard Ken Blanchard say at a seminar once. He said, when you develop a set of values, operational values for your organization, you need to rank them in order of importance. What are the non-negotiables? And to you personally. And I think, I really encourage church planters to sit down and think about that. What are the non-negotiables? The church that our family is a part of right now, I remember our pastor getting up in the launch team phase, and he basically said our number one value is going to be evangelism. And and I think we had about 80 people at a launch team meeting that we were developing and recruiting people to, and he basically said our number one value is going to be evangelism. He said, I'm not starting this church so that you can have a church that's more convenient for you to drive to, but I'm starting this church to impact and transform this city with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Well, our launch team went from 80 to about 40 the next week, and but he set the agenda and clearly articulated that. Here's just a sample set of some values that I encourage church planners to when they build their values. I want them to think about how they can measure them. And one of the great things, if I know many of you are familiar with the natural church development, the NCD process, and the 8 characteristics of a healthy church. And what I encourage them to do is to build their values around those 8 characteristics of a healthy church. Because the great thing is that a year later, you can actually go through the survey and do the NCD survey and measure the effectiveness of your values. And so it's a great tool to look at. And so here, if I was going to be starting a church today, this is the way. I ranked them in order of importance to me, and here's where I would start and look at our values, and then I would do the survey every year to measure how effective we are in living those out. Here's a little diagram that helps you see the importance of agenda harmony. The fact is that we can be standing side by side and then have some what I call value differences, okay? But here's the big principle. The longer you walk together, if there's significant value differences, the longer you walk together, the farther you'll drift apart. And so, for instance, and the big separation there is values. What will happen, though, is that some crisis will take place, and then you will separate over some matter. Now, we see this in the life of Paul and Barnabas, and we see that in Acts 15, they separated. They had a sharp disagreement and separated, and there was a values issue there. I mean, Barnabas was more relational. Barnabas wanted to give John Mark a second chance. Paul was more task-driven and saying, you know what, that kid burned me once, I'm not going to let him burn me again. And basically, that value separation eventually came out in a crisis, and the team separated. And so the fact is, that's why you need to do the upfront work in your church plant in working through those, working through your value statements using the agenda harmony survey tools that we have developed. third question is how do you build an advisory team? How do you build an advisory team? Here's the basic concept of an advisory team. You know, it comes out of 1 Timothy, the whole idea of don't be hasty in the laying on of hands. You know, one of the things that happens in new churches is that planters appoint leadership, formal leadership, way too early in the process. They don't have a vehicle where leaders can be tested. And the advisory team and it's a very specific, you know, you need to use this terminology, advisory team. You don't want to call it an advisory board. You want to call it an advisory team. A lot of our church planners call them the A teams now. But these are people that you have worked with, you have pulled together, who, you know, as you can see, have a level of spiritual maturity, have a level of commitment to the vision of the church, have displayed that commitment in a variety of ways, and now you're going to pull them into a smaller team of people who are going to assist you in leading the church as advisors. Here's a definition that we use right out of our FirstSteps manual. You know, although the advisory team has some elder-like functions, it's not an elder board. We actually have a job description on the FirstSteps network site. So the member of this team, the member of this team, serve as trusted advisors, wise counselors to the church planting pastor, but the advisory team has no decision-making power. Until the new church becomes self-governing, the church planting pastor, under the oversight of their sending agency or mother church, has the final decision-making authority. And so what you want to do is you want to have this advisory team, but it becomes a testing ground for your potential leaders. Now, one of the things that I've been impressed upon lately is that when you look at the characteristics of an elder or a deacon in Timothy, it's amazing to me that how many of those characteristics deal with emotional maturity. And so one of the things that you're looking at in this advisory time when you pull people in and you say, hey, I'd like to get your advice on stuff and like you to be a part of this team, is that you're looking for people who are emotionally mature. And you're looking at people who carry themselves well. You want to see how they interact in the meeting. One of my planters had an advisory team he was pulling together, and they had the opportunity of buying a building early on in their church plant within the first 2 years. And they began talking and discussing as an advisory team about this. But in the midst of it, I mean, he called me and said, man, it just got ugly. I mean, I couldn't believe that what came out of some of these men and some of their lives, just the ugliness of the meeting. And I said, well, number one, you don't make those guys, never make those guys elders. And number two, you keep focused on the people who are healthy and who handle themselves well in those meetings. I had one of my planters say that, you know, especially with younger church planters when they're younger and they have older people on their advisory team or older people in the life of their church. One planter had an initial kind of advisory team meeting, and this guy started off by slamming his fist on the desk and saying, well, here's how it's going to go, Pastor. And boom, I had to actually come in and have exit counsel that guy out of the life of the church. Again, look at those characteristics of an elder, of a deacon, and look at how many of those deal with emotional maturity. But the advisory team gives you a great opportunity to spot and look and develop and test potential leaders, and that's one of the things we want to encourage you to develop during your launch team. And I would keep it smaller. I would not have it big. I would not have couples on the team. If you're going to have men and women on the team, I would not have couples. I would have individuals who represent the family, and so those are some of the things that you want to take a look at. Stage 4, on the question 4, how are you going to raise the evangelistic temperature in your church? This is a rule that I picked up from Bill Eason, and it's the 100 to 300 rule, and it basically says that if your new church is going to have 10% conversion growth in the first 100, it will have 10% conversion growth at 300. And then I would add that that number will drop more and more over the life of the church. And if you have 70% conversion growth the first 100, you'll probably have 70% conversion growth at 300. Why is that? It's because there is what I call an evangelistic DNA that's set in the life of the church. An evangelistic DNA that's set in the life of the church. One of the things that I was, as a new church planter, 28 years old, I was so frustrated because I couldn't get the mature believers to join my team. And so we really built our church on conversion growth and on people coming back to Christ. And we had about 80% conversion growth on our launch team, and within the first year of our new church. Well, after 10 years of being there, 10 years, we had about 70% of our church were people who came to Christ or came back to Christ through our ministry. And the interesting thing was, we weren't the church that all the Christians went to when they moved to town. They would come to our church and they would go, man, this church feels so unstable because there's so many new Christians here. And I look back at that with great fondness and great encouragement. I was just about a month ago, 2 months ago, I had, actually 2 months to this day, I was invited back to the town where we planted our church, and had a number of people over. They threw a party for me. It was my birthday, and I was sitting in this room, about 40 people, and I couldn't believe, that basically the majority of the people in that room were people I had the privilege of baptizing. And there's no greater joy in seeing that happen. And so setting this evangelistic DNA is critical. I remember church got big enough that I began hiring staff from around the country. And I remember our staff on Monday mornings are going, this church just feels so unstable. There's so many new Christians. And I said, man, what would you want? This is what you guys told me. You want to be a part of a church that reaches people. That's what we're doing. So now we got to disciple them. Now we've got to grow them up in their faith. And we got to see them thriving, spiritually. And so those were very fond days in the life of our church. Here's a couple insights just on how to set the evangelistic DNA during the launch team phase. Number one, the planter must model evangelism. You need to be getting into spiritual conversations on a consistent basis. Last time we met, we talked about learning how to share 3 stories that will generate spiritual conversations. One, you need to learn how to share the story of God's call on your life to plant the church. Why are you planting a church in this city? And you need to share that in a compelling way that will generate what? Spiritual interest. You need to be able to share your faith story, your own personal faith story, in a way that's going to generate spiritual conversations. And you need to be able to tell God's story well, and in a way that's going to just generate those spiritual conversations. The planter must inspire the team to think missionally. The Great Commission passage, it says go and make disciples, but all of us know that, the real wording there is as you go. And see, thinking missionally is what I call as you go thinking. Is that wherever we go, we take the mission. We are on mission with God. And whether it's the workplace, whether it's a vacation, we are not, we're never, let's say, off the clock in one sense. We are always on mission. You need to inspire your team to think missionally. You do that by constantly helping them think outward from an outward focus mentality. um, encouraging them to pray and to develop a prayer list of people who they want to share their faith with, who they want to invite to a seeker study or invite to an outreach event. Number 3, you need the planter must equip the team in the basic evangelistic skills. I'm just amazed at the lack of evangelism training that's going on in our churches today. And one of the things I strongly encourage planters to do is to find a tool that will mark their church, an evangelistic tool that will mark their church. When you think of Campus Crusade, the first thing that comes to your mind is the 4 spiritual laws. When you think of Navigators, you think the Bridge to Life. These organizations trained their people in basic evangelism skills and help them develop, help them use a tool in a proficient manner. And you need to do this, especially during the launch team phase and in an ongoing effort in the life of your church. And so what I encourage planters to pick a tool, whatever it is, and impress that upon your people. So you'll have an evangelistic tool or method or a way to share the gospel. One of our guys is one of our church planters now is really just driving home the Romans road. He wants everybody in his church to know how to share the Romans road with somebody, and that's what's marking their life, marking the life of their church in articulating their faith and articulating the gospel in a very basic way. The planter must plan and provide a variety of outreach opportunities. One of the things you need to do is you need to kind of bring people along in what I would call entry-level evangelistic or outreach focus tasks. That could start off by just simply community service and doing community service, loving your city incarnationally by serving your city. It could take place through prayer walking, getting people out of their house, onto the streets, and prayer walking their neighborhoods, helping them see their community through the eyes of Jesus. It could involve servant evangelism. I'm a big proponent of servant evangelism in Steve Sjogren's material and servantevangelism.com. That's one of my favorite church planting sites. There's over 200 activities, 200 outreach ideas on that site of getting out and getting your people out in a way to earn the right to be heard, to serve them or give them a gift that will give them an opportunity to just love people and share who they are and what church they're a part of. That's critical. So plan and provide those activities. I think you need to do these weekly, in the launch team phase, especially in the launch team phase, weekly or every other week. The church plant we're involved in right now, the planting pastor there decided that he was going to do launch team meetings every other Sunday night, and then the off week were weeks we were spent in doing outreach, servant evangelism. We did what they called adventure trips. One of the things we did is we had some adventurists in our church who could teach rock climbing and kayaking and all this, and so we actually did trips for the whole purpose of, the purpose was for you to invite a non-church person to go on kind of this pre-evangelism trip where there wasn't a program, it was just hanging out with other, with people, but those were events that we did. And then the planter must see conversion growth in the launch team phase. I mean, you need to be on your knees praying that God will allow you to see people come to faith in Christ before you even launch your church, before you even have a public worship service. That it's going to be critical. It's going to be critical for you to see that, what I call that evangelistic DNA set in your life of your church. It's interesting. When I planted our church, we had during the launch team phase, we baptized 5 individuals, 5 people who came to Christ and wanted to be baptized, and so during that first phase, we baptized that. And so I've been sharing that story, for the last 20 years with church planters, and now it's actually become part of our culture in our church planting movement, and now we have people who are just wanting to see how many baptisms they can have before they actually plant their church. Here's a young man, Joe Basil, here in the Chicago area. He's got the record right now that I know of. He had I think they did 33 baptisms before they actually launched the church, did the official grand opening of their new church. And I had another gentleman that could be close to that. I think he was over 20 baptisms that took place before he had launched his church. And now we've had a couple of our new churches actually do baptismal services at their grand opening. And what a way to do a public baptism service on the launch of your church. So yeah, you got to make sure conversion growth is going to happen during the launch team phase. Here's a couple questions just to reflect on as we wind up, and then we'll get ready for some Q&A. How will you know your launch team is on the same page? How are you going to test those potential leaders on your launch team? One of the things that I always tell our planters, make sure during the launch team phase you're taking offerings, because as Jim Griffiths has said, I love his comment here. How do you know that people are on your team with you? He said there's 3 ways. Number 1, their money's in the pot. Number 2, their money's in the pot. Number 3, their money's in the pot. And if people are not financially committed to your cause, they're really not on your team. And you need to find ways of testing those potential leaders. What are going to be some of the qualifications for those on your launch team? And then how will you keep the evangelist fervor alive during the launch team phase? All right, I guess we can go to some Q&A now.
All right. Well, thanks, Gary. Real quick, this will hopefully be the easiest question. Can you repeat the name of the site with the 200 plus?
Yeah, it's servantevangelism.com.
All right. I will type that in here for everyone to access. And yeah, we have quite a few questions that came in here. One, going back to your story of terminating that original launch team or core group. The question is why, if you can repeat that, why is a definable termination point necessary? Or maybe how do you sense that? How do you know when you've gone too long?
Right.
And it's time to terminate?
Yeah. Well, I think this is what we've learned over time. I mean, I obviously had to learn it the hard way. And then as you plant more churches, you learn. Every time we plant a church, we learn something. And so we've just seen over time that if we use the launch team terminology, that team is to gather for a purpose. It has its purpose right in its name. The purpose of this group is to launch the church. And so actually in the FirstSteps manual and then on the site and in our training, we go really into depth on this in a whole sequence of how to build a team, and then how to and actually after their church is launched, and some do it before the church is launched, or maybe even the Saturday before the grand opening. They'll actually pull the team together and they'll celebrate what God's done, And at that point, they'll say, you know what, from now on, we don't refer to ourselves as a launch team. We just refer to ourselves as a part of this new church, because you want to, the whole idea of launching is to be inclusive of others, and so that's part of that dynamic. Some of our planters now, what they'll do is maybe 2 months later, after the church is launched, they'll actually celebrate, especially if they do a fall launch. They'll actually have a Christmas party with the launch team, and give them a gift. Like our pastor gave us, our church is called Northbridge Church, and he actually gave us a book of bridges, and he wrote a personal note inside it saying, I want to thank you for launching this church and really living out our vision to build bridges into our community with the gospel of Christ. And so he gave us a gift, and then basically at that point he said, we're no longer going to be, called the launch team. This is going to be more of a leadership team, a leadership community within the church, but because we want to be inclusive of everybody who's come since the church is launched.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Along those lines, in terms of outreach, how do you maintain a balance between caring for those who are currently in your network of relationships, but also stretching beyond that and stretching others beyond that to see and to build and increase their level of connection with people in the community?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's always a fine balance, but I would say this, that you're going to spend time in pastoral care and shepherding, encouraging, and building up people in their faith, but you need to have that focused time and energy. I mean, Bob Logan talks about during the networking phase, the building phase, kind of before you launch, you need to be spending about 70% of your time in networking, evangelism, and outreach. And then what I tell our planters is that after you've launched your church, you need to figure out how to keep a healthy balance, and really spending about 20% of your energy and time in outreach, and outreach in community service and networking in the community, and really encouraging believers to do that. So, that's always the struggle. There's this the entropy that takes place. We call it in the church planting landmines, but we call it evangelistic entropy that takes place, and the planter's always going to be fighting that. Because if you're going to keep your church on a level of being fully engaged in God's mission, that you're going to need to have that clear outreach focus. But it doesn't mean you have to sacrifice pastoral care. You want to raise up those who have shepherding gifts and pastoral gifts, and empower them to be caring for other believers.
Yeah. With that, what have you found to be effective, given the diversity of gifts when you have evangelists and shepherds and teachers and apostles? Should they all be on or part of a launch team? What have you found to be effective in orchestrating all of those gifts for God's purposes in that community?
Yeah. Well, I think, one, you want everybody to be, what I said, thinking missionally. Okay, that they're not off the clock, and that we don't all have the gift of evangelism, but we can all think missionally, and we can all have an outreach focus and an outreach spirit. And so I think you need to continue to foster that in the church and in the life of the church. And people are going to have different evangelistic styles. That's why I think the Contagious Christian material is great, because people are going to have a variety of evangelistic styles that need to be expressed. but we need to all be engaged in it at some level. And so just continuing to have people serve in their giftedness and area of ministry, but with that outreach mentality always at the forefront. What I like to call just missional thinking, or as you go kind of a spirit, always happening in the life of your church. And I think the whole idea that this entropy, it's going to wind down, and if you're going to have continue to be engaged in seeing lost people come to Christ, you need to have, as a leader, you need to be the one kind of being that, the law of entropy says that if there's no outside energy, things are going to actually wind down and collapse. And so there needs to be an outside energy force, and well, that's leadership. And the churches that have leaders who just continue to champion that outreach mentality and missional thinking are the ones that really continue to have a long-term conversion growth.
How necessary is it for the individual church planter to provide that evangelistic energy? Could it come from someone else on the team?
Well, it could, but if people don't see you getting engaged and talking about the spiritual conversations you're getting involved in, a planter I coached early on in the life of my coaching career, what he did is he had his launch team meetings on Wednesdays, and he was in a college town, and so he spent Wednesday afternoons, about 4 hours on Wednesday afternoon, mingling in coffee shops and just seeking to get into spiritual conversation. So he had fresh stories to tell. And so what we tell planters, tell your stories, tell the great glorious stories, of the spiritual conversation, and tell the ones where you embarrass yourself and where you stumbled and bumbled. Be authentic and be real, because not every spiritual conversation goes well. And but you're engaged in it, and I think that's the important thing of modeling that. The planter needs to model that spirit of building relationships with unchurched people, getting actively engaged in the community. We talked about last time that networking is more about joining something than it is about hanging out somewhere. And so joining the Chamber of Commerce and joining a subcommittee in the Chamber of Commerce, or joining some service group where you're around people who are God-fearers and people who are far from God, and is really going to be critical.
Yeah.
So
shifting gears just a bit, when thinking about the advisory team, and particularly who's on it, for those who are closely connected with a mother church, would you recommend members of the mother church being on that advisory team, or a mix, or would they, would members of the advisory team, would you want them to come from exclusively outside of the mother church?
Yeah, there are actually two types of teams. There is the what I would say the official, in a sense, directors, or those who actually, the legal directors of the new church. And typically, what we do is we have those as maybe two pastors or two lay, especially in a mother church situation. It would be the planter, and then either two pastors who are part of the organization that's starting the church, or two elders from the mother church. That would actually be the official directors, the ones who are basically who sign the bylaws for your state. Okay, and so they're the actual ones who are the official leaders of the plant in that sense. the advisory team is really built up of people who are going to be long-term in the life of the church, and who could be potential elders. And that could take up to 3 years, for you to find those potential elders. And then once the church does get elders that are part of that other team, the legal, what I call directors of the church, in a sense, they actually sign over the church to this new group of elders, thus the church becoming self-governing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's typically the way you want to look at it. But the advisory team is more really built up of people who are in the life of the church, because that's a testing ground for future leaders.
Mm-hmm.
So there's really two separate teams.
Oh, that's good. That's good. For those who are just starting out, what advice would you give a planter with a team that is new to an area? Let's say they've all either been sent or all have gathered in a particular community. What advice would you give them?
Can you repeat that one more time again?
Yeah, for a planter and his or her young staff or young team has moved to a new community or a new area. What advice would you give them for some initial first steps?
So it's like a pioneer church plant, just moving new to an area.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think again, you want to get out in your community. One of the things that happens, we talk about starting with a team, which is really which we encourage that. We encourage team planting. But Ed Stetzer, in his book, Planting a Church in a Postmodern Culture, he talks about the danger of it and some resources that what happens is that the team can be just hang out with each other and not really get out into the community. And so what I would say is that you'd come together. I think you have a weekly meeting that this new team comes together weekly for prayer, and then really holds each other accountable about the spiritual conversations they're getting involved in and how they're integrating themselves into the life of the community. And so, it's critical. One of the things that I really challenge pastors with, if they want to really raise the evangelistic temperature of the church, is, your staff meetings, you need to be talking about, having staff share the spiritual conversations they're getting into weekly. And, especially if you have a larger church, your staff should be having spiritual conversations on a weekly basis with people who are, struggling with their faith, or people who are, far from God, or people who are seeking or searching. There are plenty of opportunities, and I just think you need to be disciplined in that, and it needs to be championed by the leader and holding the team accountable in those areas. So that'd be my advice there is don't get caught up with hanging out with each other and building community with each other. Have that balance of challenging each other to live missionally, to get into spiritual conversations, to figure out ways of joining and integrating into the life of the community.
Yeah, that's great. So, essentially, be the church, live the life of the church, and take the church to the community is what I hear you saying. Yeah, that's good. That's good. One last question. One community and church is pursuing a small group model, launching small groups in January, even though their official launch date isn't until September. Would you suggest that as these small groups grow and multiply, that they begin to gather even now or even when they have critical mass, or should they wait until September to actually gather for the first time?
Yeah, I think, and they're doing they're creating, is this you know, are they going to create, you know, I'd have to ask more questions about is this going to be a house church strategy, or is it more of a, you know, sell the celebration strategy? You know, that would be the critical piece. Are they going to have a weekly public worship gathering? You know, that the larger crowd can come to. If that's the way they're going to go, I would say that, you know, get the small groups going, kind of in that gathering phase. But once you get, you know, 20 to 30 people, I would say start gathering them in the launch team phase, because your launch team, the launch team meetings are really training meetings to launching this larger service, the larger public service, and growing those small groups also. So, so I would say you would, you know, if you're going to launch in September, you want to have those meetings before then. So.
Yeah, that's good. Well, Gary, we have a couple minutes left here. Are there any last words or parting words you'd like to leave with us?
Well, you know, I think you got to, you know, one of the things that this whole idea of building a team is just, it's a great opportunity that you have. And I'm just going to end with this quote from this legendary coach, football coach of, his name was Red Blake, and he was the mentor of Vince Lombardi. And he said these words. He says, "Once in a while you're lucky enough to have the thrill and satisfaction of working with a group of men who are willing to make every sacrifice to achieve a goal, and then experience the achieving of it with them. In this, believe me, there is a payment that cannot be matched in any other pursuit." And you know, he's talking about a football team there, okay, and winning football games and championships. But you know, we have an opportunity to build a team, and I've been a part of, you know, 4 teams, you know, that people that are there's nothing like it. There's nothing like it to work together, to see you know, the gospel being advanced through us, and seeing lives transformed, and seeing churches established. And so you know, build your team with care, build your team with prayer, and build your team with wise counsel, and with skill, and keep them focused on the goal.
Indeed. Well, Gary, thank you so much for walking us through this critical step of planting a missional church, and we really appreciate you sharing your insights with us. We want to thank also all the attendees and participants who joined us today. I realize we didn't get to all of your questions, and so I will forward your questions on to Gary, and you are free to, he may respond to those on his blog, and so feel free to check out his blog periodically to see if he responds to your particular question. If you have any questions or comments about today's webinar, feel free to email me at johnvb@coachnet.org or at support@coachnet.org, and I'll be glad to address your questions or comments. As I mentioned earlier, that this webinar is being recorded and will be available from the CoachNet website within a few hours, and so feel free to check back on our webcast page. It'll be posted there when it is all edited and ready to go. Well, wherever you are in your journey, we hope that you'll invite us along as together we seek to see God's will done on earth as it is in heaven. And so we look forward to connecting with you again in the future. God bless.